This is a story about a girl who died, along with her lover during the uprising, but was reborn as the owner of a potion shop. She meets a man who looks like her beloved boyfriend, but he has a crazy desire to make love. Therefore, the girl is forced to help him cope with this. I tried very hard when writing this story. Therefore, mandatory, like this video, and subscribe to the channel if you want the continuation of the story. On the day this story begins, there were very strong battles on which the fate of many people depended. The loyal knights, even though they were fewer in number, tried their best to defeat and protect their chapter. Almost the entire castle was blazing in flames and flowing in rivers of blood. There were many people around, fighting and killing each other. Here and there lay the corpses of people. Many people were screaming in pain and asking for help. Fireballs were flying in the air. A lady standing at the window, whose silhouette was slightly visible, was watching all this. It was Rena Corneli, a beautiful golden-haired girl who was watching with horror in her eyes. Her trembling hands held a handkerchief to wipe away her tears. She realized that no one would get mercy. Rena looked out the window and saw the flames of the fire spread around. All that could be heard everywhere was the screams of people. She didn't understand what was happening. She was scared out of her mind. The only thing on her mind was to run as far away from here as possible. Suddenly, someone entered her room. She turned around sharply, not expecting this person to come to her. Did he really care? And that's why he came, she thought. A man stood in front of her, determined, and nervously clenched his hands into fists. This dark-haired, tall, handsome man with red eyes was none other than her husband Caligo Edmund. Rena quickly ran up to him and excitedly asked him what was going on. After all, there was a reason why this attack and fighting had started. He did not answer her, but took out the jewelry he wanted to give her. His actions were incomprehensible to her, and she was also surprised that for the first time in a long time, he addressed her not as you or wife, but called her by her first name, Rena. Caligo walked up to her and placed a piece of jewelry with a magical stone around her neck. She kept thinking about why he called her by her name and why he did it now. Being near him, Rena felt safe for a moment. Then he told her that she could not leave this place. His words shocked and frightened her deeply. It could only mean one thing: that she might not survive. He stood there looking at her with his cold, unfazed gaze. She couldn't understand why he was doing this to her. Even in this kind of situation, he doesn't give her a chance to run away and save herself. Memories of their life together came flooding back to her. Their marriage, now in its 5th year, had changed nothing. His words didn't seem like a concern to her. She recalled that she had never traveled outside the duchy. For the duration of their 5-year marriage, she had been within the castle. She felt sad, hurt, and afraid because she had no other choice in the situation. She could not disobey him. His words hurt her heart deeply. Even though it was uncertain whether she would survive or not, he still told her to stay and not to go anywhere. Rena wondered if he meant that if she had to, she should meet her death here. It was absurd and cruel to her. Suddenly, she wondered if he planned on keeping her alive. Despite her speculation, she asked him, "What about you? Are you coming back?" He remained calm and confident. Caligo coldly replied that whatever happened, he would come back to her. In this way, he tried to calm her down and leave her in a safe place. His back view, which she had grown tired of in 5 years, was as unwavering as ever. He promised her that they would meet again and left quickly. Rena looked after him with sadness in her eyes. She folded her hands in supplication and hoped that they would meet again. Unfortunately, that was the last time she saw him alive, for after a while, all she saw was his head. A knight came to her and informed her that the rebel leader had been defeated. Rena could not believe that her husband was dead. She cried and trembled with fear. The knight came closer and closer to her. He said that according to the laws of the empire, the rebel family members were also sentenced to execution. The grief-stricken Rena could not stand on her feet from such shock and from fear. She fell to the floor right in front of her husband's head, who was the rebel leader. She didn't want to die because she was innocent of anything. Rena did not want to accept such a tragic fate. The knight said she was sentenced to death by order of His Majesty and swung his sword at her. Rena was on her knees, and tears of despair poured from her eyes. She looked at Caligo's head and wept, calling for him, while the knight carried out the order. Just like that, in the same place, and on the same day as her husband, she met her death. Some time had passed. One fine winter day, the city street was crowded, and the sun was shining all around, and snow was swirling and falling everywhere. People went about their usual way of life. Someone was buying something. Someone was selling something. Everyone was busy working and going about their business somewhere in a hurry. The vendors kept calling out to the customers and showing them their best goods. Some of them went home quickly with their purchases, while a child carried something in his hands and ran somewhere. The two ladies were animatedly discussing the Grand Duke of Ethos, who was rumored to have donated money to the temple. This surprised them greatly. Some lady smiled and said that his actions made it look like he was about to die. A girl dressed in a brown cloak walked quietly near them. She did not go unnoticed. Everyone began to greet her and ask how she was doing. This sweet, beautiful stranger with golden hair and bright eyes was Isha. She smiled happily and replied that she was doing well and it was a wonderful morning. She took off her hood and enjoyed the beautiful weather, the wind gently touching her hair. Esha looked out at the city, admiring it, and thought that she hadn't even realized there was such a place in the book. She remembered her past life, how she died. She remembered that she had actually been killed by the Knight Commander that day. When she opened her eyes, she realized that she had fallen into an affair and changed from Caligo Rena's consort to a different person. She became not an ordinary woman, but the owner of a potion store, and her name was Esha. 10 years have passed since then. She also became famous for the medicines she made herself. She already had her own customers. Today, she was sending medicine for Sister Verna. And also, Isha prepared the required amount of medicines for the temple and asked them to send them there. On this day, a new customer came into her store. She happily welcomed him into Asha's potion store. It was clear at first sight that this was an unusual man. He said, "Miss Asha Bliss? Right?" She smiled and replied that he was not mistaken, and it was her. She thought about who this unusual customer was. He said he'd heard she could create a unique remedy. Aisha asked what exactly he was interested in. She kept wondering if he was a count, a marquis, or maybe the Duke's butler. He replied that the cure was of interest to the person he worked for. Esha explained that she only makes custom potions after a personal meeting. He said then she would have to go with him. Then he put a bag of money on the table as a down payment and said that she would get 10 times as much when the order was completed. In addition, he explained that if the agreement was broken, she would have to pay 20 times the compensation. Of course, Esha realized that this order would pay her back for 3 or 4 months of work. In fact, it was a very profitable proposition indeed, but she was alarmed by his words about breaking the agreement and paying compensation. His cold look and stern demeanor made her realize that he was serious. But the compensation didn't scare her off, as the benefit of the work done was very attractive to her. Esha smiled and said that the checkout was paid separately and asked if that would be okay with him. That same day, she traveled with him down the snowy road to the castle for a private meeting with a patient to create a cure for him. The carriage was speeding along the snow-covered roads. All around, the trees were covered with white snow. Esha had no idea who she would end up seeing. During the ride, she looked out the window, and as she got closer to the castle, Esha saw that it was just huge. She wondered who had sent this man to her for the potion. The carriage was encrusted with a large number of magical stones. That meant that the family it belonged to was definitely wealthy. However, Esha didn't see a picture of a coat of arms anywhere, so she had no idea which family it was. Like this sitting across from a stranger, she thought she had traveled quite far from the city. What if she ran into them when she left the capital? Finally, the trip was over, and she arrived at a huge castle that belonged to a complicated man. The closer she got to him, the more she realized where she had gotten. The family crest on the castle and inside the castle made it clear to her that she was not mistaken. As uncomfortable as she was, there was no turning back. Of course, Esha was alarmed and shocked at the same time, for she had gotten into the Grand Duke's castle. This was the duchy of the great Lord Ethos. People said he was a terrible tyrant, and there were some bad rumors about him. In addition, it was said that he could not sleep without a woman. Therefore, he was constantly surrounded by beautiful women of the weaker sex. In addition, some people said that he did not value human life at all. He was a man whose name inspired fear. Despite that, he was the main character in this novel. Esha pondered why the Grand Duke of the Empire was ordering the potion. Most likely he had something to hide. For the first time in a long time, she thought she shouldn't have gotten involved and taken the gold. Then the butler stopped by the door and said that his lordship was waiting for her in the room and he would give her all the details. Esha agreed and quietly entered the room. To her surprise, the room was dark and she didn't understand why that was. Aisha wondered if someone was in the room because no one was visible anywhere. Not only was it dark, but she didn't feel the presence of anyone in the room. But suddenly she saw him. She couldn't see his face because of the darkness. Aisha wondered why he was standing there silent. She decided that he was probably watching her. She thought he seemed like some kind of brute, but he might also be acting that way because he was the main character. Nevertheless, she did not forget her manners and bowed and said, "Pleased to meet you, your lordship. I am the owner of a potion store in the Carmian capital of Ash Bliss." She thought it was better to think about the gold. In any case, she could come back as soon as she finished making the potion. As soon as she started thinking about it, all fear and worry went away. Esha smiled and looked at him. As she did so, she thanked his lordship for sending his man to accompany her on her way to the castle. She wanted to tell him what the road had been like, but suddenly, as he walked toward her, Esha began to remember her ex-husband Caligo and the day they died. She also remembered the words of the knights who shouted, "Kill! Seize them! Rebel leader!" And that leader turned out to be, unfortunately, her ex-husband, who told her that he would come back. She felt very sad. It had been 10 years since Isha had gotten into the book. She thought she had lost the memory of her past life, but she still remembered her ex-husband. and the man who stood before her was an exact replica of him. She was both sad and happy to see him again. Aisha stood and scrutinized him for a while. She saw him as her dead husband, Caligo. Aisha couldn't be wrong. He had the same hair color and the same eye color, and their looks were identical. She couldn't believe her eyes that it was him. Aisha wondered, trying to figure out how he'd gotten here. Nevertheless, remembering the events of that day, she was shocked. After all, he had died then, just as she had, and now he stood before her alive. That horrible moment when the knight came with his head in his hands, she would never forget. Aisha continued to look at him with a sad look. Although he looked like her husband, she found it hard to believe and said quietly, "Caligo?" Suddenly, she remembered that the protagonist of the novel was also named Caligo. He was staring at her with his scarlet eyes, trying to get a better look at her. She bowed to him and greeted the Grand Duke of Caligo, Ethos. Aisha remembered the affair because of the name. She thought maybe it was just a coincidence. It was all very confusing, and maybe she could have misunderstood something. Caligo decided that he should explain himself to her. He said that he had behaved rudely. His sincerity was unexpected and surprised her very much. Besides, the Grand Duke said he should have come to see her in person. When Aisha heard his explanation, she was at a loss. After all, because of the many rumors, she already had a bad opinion of him. Caligo didn't look like the image of the man everyone was talking about. Also, his voice and appearance reminded her a lot of her ex-husband. Suddenly, she felt very sad. Aisha realized it was Caligo. It was definitely him, her ex-husband. The Duke kindly offered her a seat. She looked around and thought of all the things she wanted to ask him. Above all, she was curious to know how he had gotten here, into this affair. She wondered if he had woken up here as quickly as she had. Also, Aisha wanted to ask Caligo if he remembered his horrible death and the quick defeat of his rebellion. But what interested her most was why they had died like that and why he had become the rebel leader. The Grand Duke told her that he felt worse than he might think, so he apologized to her. Aisha saw nothing wrong with that and replied that it was an honor to meet him. He was pleased that she had heard him and reacted with understanding. The situation was incomprehensible to her. Aisha decided that she would not reveal her identity to him now. The room was dark, and she was sure he couldn't see her face. Suddenly, the servants of the castle came and brought tea and sweets and everything necessary for a tea party. The tea was rich as well as fragrant and had a red color, and the sweets looked very appetizing. Aisha continued to scrutinize Caligo. She also made sure that not only did he look similar, he even sat like her ex-husband. After watching them so closely, she noticed that they had differences, namely different behaviors. After all, her ex-husband, Caligo Edmund, was a calm and balanced man. While the protagonist of Caligo Ethos was different, you could say his opposite. He was not only unpredictable, but unstoppable. And also, according to the rumors of the inhabitants, he could not sleep without a woman by his side. But those differences aside, he could definitely be Caligo Edmund. All these thoughts kept her in a state of unease. Aisha continued to ponder who the Grand Duke sitting in front of her really was. And it suddenly occurred to her that such a noble man could have been stuck in that lustful body. Caligo continued to quietly sip his flavored tea and study her discreetly. Of course he noticed her gaze. Then he asked Aisha if she was comfortable in that cloak. He didn't understand why she didn't take it off. Still, she already had an excellent explanation for her behavior. She calmly replied that she had a terrible scar on her face. Her answer satisfied him, so he didn't question her further about it. Aisha decided that she would do anything to keep him from seeing her face. Even though she was uncomfortable saying the wrong thing, she tried to stay calm. The most important thing for her at the moment was to take care of his problem and get the money. She was also afraid to think of what might happen if she made mistakes. Suddenly, she noticed another difference between the Grand Duke and her former husband. Caligo Ethos's body was larger and many times larger than her ex-husband Caligo Edmund's. Also, even his thighs were larger in volume. Therefore, not only their behavior, but also their physique was different. The Grand Duke finished his tea and set the cup on the table. Then he asked Aisha if she had seen enough. He had seen her scrutinizing him for some time. His sudden question caught her off guard, and she didn't realize what it was about. Caligo explained to her that he was uncomfortable with her stare. No doubt she was greatly surprised that he so easily noticed the way she regarded him. However, Aisha was not confused, and smiling calmly, explained that studying her client's behavior helped her in brewing potions. He clarified if she meant it as a checkup with the doctor. Of course, Aisha couldn't say that she was not only studying him for treatment, but also admiring him, because his body attracted her. The more she looked at him, the more different thoughts popped into her head that even made her feel embarrassed, and her cheeks flushed even more. She replied quietly that he was absolutely right, and it was exactly like a doctor's examination. Caligo heard that she knows how to make potions without side effects. Aisha confirmed that he was right, which is why they call her medicine special. She asked the Grand Duke to tell her first of all the symptoms of the disease that was plaguing him. He looked at her carefully and thought about something. In fact, Caligo wondered if he should tell her everything. Naturally, Aisha didn't understand why he suddenly fell silent and didn't answer her question, so she turned to him again. The Grand Duke angrily replied that she did not need to know about the symptoms in detail, thus he signaled her to temper her curiosity. Despite this, she didn't give up, and smiling explained that if she didn't know all the details, how would she be able to brew him a potion? And she was right. After a bit of silence, Caligo quickly said he wanted to get rid of the sex drive. Aisha was surprised and thought she had misheard him, so she asked, "What, sexual?" After his words, the Grand Duke was immediately embarrassed, and his cheeks instantly turned red. He was very embarrassed by his words. Despite his embarrassment, he told her once again that he wished he could get rid of the sexual attraction. There was silence between them for a moment. At the same time, Sir Ventus, after reviewing the documents, learned that Esha Bliss had arrived. She decided to help the Grand Duke prepare the potion. He was highly agitated and loudly shouted, asking if it was really true that it was Esha. He wanted to know where she was now. The Grand Duke's butler explained to him that she was under His Excellency's jurisdiction, and he asked Sir Ventus if he was familiar with her. Sir Ventus calmly replied that this was true, but it was an unusual acquaintance. The butler continued to block his way and calmly explained that she was conversing with his lordship. He did not want Sir Ventus to interrupt their conversation. But knowing Caligo's situation, he guessed what they were talking about, so he asked Butler if they were talking about sex and demanded to be let in. But the butler asked him to wait until they finished talking, and then he would let him through to the Grand Duke. In this situation, Ventus had no choice but to agree and wait for a while. He sat back in his chair and wondered if it was really her, his dear student Asha Bliss. It had been so long since he had seen her, and he was looking forward to seeing her again. Ventus remembered that 7 years ago, there had been a terrible incident that had caused many things to change. If it wasn't for that incident, the magic tower didn't just belong to him. It belonged to this child, since she could become a great magician. At this time, the Grand Duke sat in front of Isha, with his head lowered, and his hand covering his face that was flushed with embarrassment. And Esha kept thinking about the situation and the past. The silence continued between them for a while. She remembered that their marriage, Caligo Edmund and Rena Corneli, had only lasted 5 years. It was hard to call it a marriage, though, because she was like a bird in a cage. To everyone, they were not just beautiful, but the perfect couple. But no one knew how she really felt. Unfortunately for Rena, it was a terrible, lonely marriage, because her husband forbade her everything he could. Besides, in all the years of their marriage, they had never once shared the marital bed, and she didn't know what the reason for his behavior was. And now it was as if a completely different person was in front of her, talking to her about sexual attraction. Isha remembered reading in a novel that he might have problems with his sex drive, so she decided to ask him about it. She resolutely told him that meant the rumors were not lying. The Grand Duke merely smiled at her words. He immediately stopped being embarrassed and said that there were many rumors about him. Caligo asked her which rumors she meant. Aisha explained that she'd been referring to the rumors that said he'd become a different person. He asked her to be more specific about it. Smiling, she replied that she was still a chatterbox, and her words might sound harsh. The Grand Duke was very curious, so he allowed her to tell her everything frankly. His interest surprised her. Isha began her story about the rumors that he spent every night with women without missing a day. Moreover, not only nights, but days he spent with women in or out of the room, and also that he had long ago lost his dignity as a nobleman. Aisha clarified that if the rumors were to be believed, he'd been like that before. People were now saying that it was as if he had been replaced. She asked him if he wanted her to continue her story. He replied that it was enough. Aisha asked him to explain to her why he wanted to suppress his desire right now. Her question made him a little angry, and he said she probably hadn't heard all the rumors. His tone made her tense up and nervously adjust her hood. Asha asked what he meant. The Grand Duke explained that he had wanted to suppress his desire not just now, but since he was reborn. That phrase, "from the moment he was reborn," suggested to Ash that it was when he came back to life. After a while, she learned that he had the standard side effect symptoms: numbness in his arms and legs, headaches. She asked if there might have been other symptoms. After thinking for a moment, the Grand Duke replied that he was also bothered by insomnia. Esha was very surprised. Caligo admitted that he couldn't even sleep at night. In fact, she had never heard of such a side effect due to the effects of the medication. In her opinion, it could be because the medication was ineffective, so this symptom appeared. Also, Esha thought, this body must have had a stormy night with one of his women. Such thoughts continued to confuse her, but she had to think it through. Since the success of the treatment depended on it, she needed to find the cause. After writing down all the symptoms, she asked the Grand Duke if he was still taking the medicine. He explained that he continues to take it because he can't touch women in confined spaces. Aisha was surprised that it was that serious. He told her that if she'd heard the rumors, she should know all about it. Then she realized that the rumors were true, since he had said so. Suddenly, the Grand Duke stood up. He walked over to the desk, then opened a drawer and pulled out a red box from there. He opened it. Inside was a bottle with some kind of liquid. Esha asked him in surprise what it was. The Grand Duke explained that it was a potion he was drinking. It was brewed for him by the mage of House Ethos. That surprised her even more. She asked why he needed it when he had a personal mage. He explained because this potion couldn't cure him completely. Caligo reminded her that he wanted a drug with no side effects. His desire was clear to Asha. She opened the bottle. Esha could tell from the smell and the appearance of the medicine that it seemed to have been brewed by a very powerful mage. She didn't think long and decided to try the medicine right away. At once, Esha drank everything in the bottle. The Grand Duke was shocked by her action. He was also worried that something might happen to her. He quickly grabbed her hand. Caligo angrily asked her what she had done. Esha told him that she couldn't understand all the ingredients by smell and might miss some of them. Esha asked him not to worry. Since she was a professional in her field and knew exactly what she was doing, that's why she drank the medicine. Through this, Esha learned that the medicine contained sareth, peep, ront, holy water, fire, and magic. They were herbs of the highest quality that reduced libido. She thought about the fact that he drank such a strong potion, but it had no effect since he couldn't even sleep. He was really a protagonist in the flesh. Placing the bottle on the table, Esha said she would brew her potion, but she might have some questions in the process. She started to remove the stone jewelry from her neck and said that first of all, she needed to check something. The Grand Duke asked her what she meant. Esha explained to him that she wanted to know what attribute his lordship had, since it is different for every person. In order to recognize its attribute, one needed a magic stone. Fortunately, she had one that included 4 attributes and was extremely valuable. In front of Caligo, on the table, lay a piece of jewelry with this magical stone she had given him to test its attribute. He took the stone in his hand and squeezed it tightly. His action startled Esha, and she quickly went to him and asked him not to squeeze the stone too hard. After a few minutes, the magic stone in his hand began to glow with a golden light, and then a red glow appeared around the magic stone. It was enveloped in a red flame of magical energy. The magic stone began to glow even more, and it really scared Esha. She had a feeling that just a little more, and the magic stone would explode. She took her 2 hands on his arm and tried to calm those magical flames. Fortunately, nothing happened, and the explosion was avoided, and the magic stone was fine. In addition, the Grand Duke gave her the opportunity to touch himself. That surprised her, because he avoided touching her. Caligo opened his fist and showed the stone. Esha had already realized what his attribute was. On his palm was a magic stone shrouded in red flames. This meant that its element was pure fire. He agreed with her that he did. She also realized that his level was quite high. It was most likely because he was the main character. Of course, Esha knew that potions could only have an effect on the possessor of pure elements if they were made from high-grade ingredients. That was why the potion he drank didn't help him fully. Perhaps that potion didn't work because of Caligo's attribute. It meant that the mage was mistaken about his element and level. Or there could have been another reason. The wrong ingredients were purchased. Nevertheless, she understood how she should proceed. Esha approached Caligo and told him that it was very dangerous, and he should have listened to what she said. The Grand Duke agreed with her that he had been reckless and promised to be more careful next time. Esha adjusted her hood and said she would need time to make the potion. She also explained that not many people were searching for ingredients in the fire element area, so she didn't buy them in advance. This made Caligo a little upset. He realized that Esha wouldn't be able to make the potion now. He asked her if she would go out to buy the ingredients herself. She replied that she would do it all herself. Even though she had other customers, she promised to try to get them as soon as possible and asked him to keep drinking that potion. The Grand Duke promised to follow her instructions. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, and his butler entered. He informed him that someone was already waiting for him. Caligo realized that the meeting was important and he should hurry. The Grand Duke said that Esha could go back and he would see her off. She began to worry that he might recognize her, so Esha replied that she could walk by herself and that he should not accompany her. Besides, she reminded him that he had a meeting, but Caligo disagreed with her and said that it would be a kind of security. His behavior surprised her even more. Esha wondered why he would do this, why he would see her off in person, and why he was acting this way in the first place. The Grand Duke explained to her that he was doing this so that his precious guest would not be hurt because of someone miserable. He quickly headed for the door, leaving a surprised Esha pondering. Caligo intrigued her greatly. She couldn't figure out who he was talking about. Esha followed him. The Grand Duke kept his promise and escorted her out. He walked in front, she behind him, and his butler behind her. Suddenly, she saw all the servants lined up and standing bowed, and there was silence all around. This meant that it was not an ordinary guest who had come, but someone from an aristocratic or royal family. Aisha wondered who this person was, since everyone was acting like this. Suddenly, Caligo stopped. Aisha finally saw this important guest in front of her. A tall, golden-haired, handsome man with golden-colored eyes stood in front of the Grand Duke. He asked Caligo where he was going. The Grand Duke looked at him unhappily and greeted Crown Prince Dishan. He then covered Aisha with himself, preventing the Crown Prince from seeing her. Caligo motioned for him to go up to the room first. The Grand Duke had promised him that he would join him soon. It was very important to him now to keep him from seeing Aisha. The Crown Prince was very surprised and laughed. He said that he got the feeling that Caligo was not happy to see him today. He felt very sad about it. He walked past the Grand Duke, and his gaze was caught by a woman standing next to him. He asked him who the woman was. His eyes lit up with curiosity, for Caligo had tried so hard to hide her from him and quickly lead her away. But the Grand Duke continued to restrain his emotions and coldly replied that this was his guest who had come to discuss personal matters. But to the Crown Prince, that meant she was no ordinary guest. She was most likely some lady who had taken a fancy to Caligo, so he asked again of the Grand Duke if he had guests he did not know. His curiosity kept Caligo on guard and kept his composure. He didn't want this man to come near her. Still, the Crown Prince didn't give up. He said he had to at least greet her. After all, he was the Crown Prince of this empire, but the Grand Duke had other things on his mind. Aisha was a little startled by such intense curiosity on the part of the Crown Prince. She remembered again the novel she had read earlier. In this novel, the author named these two antagonists as the bastard Caligo and the mad dog Dishan. They were surrounded by women and lots of money around them. Besides, the Crown Prince and the Grand Duke had been friends since childhood. They also had a very close relationship and shared everything, whatever it was. But as Aisha looked at them now, she realized something was wrong, though she'd never once heard of them fighting and their relationship soured. Still, she thought it was most likely a matter of power. After a couple minutes of silence, the Grand Duke answered him that she was a mage. At the same time, he reminded that neither the Emperor nor the nobles could force mages to do anything or antagonize them. This also applied to the mages themselves. The Crown Prince only smiled at what he heard. Caligo again said that this agreement was signed by His Majesty the Emperor. This whole situation further piqued the Crown Prince's interest in Ash. He stepped closer to the Grand Duke, put his hand on his shoulder, and told him that he was the kind of man who wanted to be friends with their mages. All the more so, he was even more eager to befriend the female mages, the representatives of this continent. From his snide smile and demeanor, it was clear to Caligo that this was more than just interest. He even felt uncomfortable with what he was hearing. The Crown Prince said he wanted to say hello to her and tried to touch her with his hand. Meanwhile, Aisha was trembling and nervously adjusting her hood. But suddenly someone shouted, "Aisha!" She heard a familiar voice and immediately turned around. She wondered who was calling her name. Meanwhile, someone was running very fast towards her, even flying. She saw that a man was rushing toward her with all his might. Aisha looked at him and couldn't believe that this was the man she had seen a long time ago and knew well. In front of her stood Cervantes, smiling happily and glowing with happiness. He was running and excited so much that even his cheeks were flushed. He directly flew on the wings of the wind with open arms to embrace her. Ventus was very happy to see them. He finally landed, and his magic swept around and enveloped Aisha. As she looked closer, Aisha was glad she hadn't made a mistake. It was indeed Cervantes. He walked over to her, hugged her tightly, pulled her against him, and said her name. He was very pleased to see her. Since Aisha hadn't seen him in a very long time, she asked if it was really him Ventus, whom she knew very well. He cheerfully replied that she was right. Ventus also reminded her that it had been so long since they had seen each other and that he had been looking forward to seeing her. Suddenly his face became sad, and he told her that he thought she would contact him, but he never received any letter from her. But their conversation was interrupted by the Grand Duke, who stood in front of them and looked at Ventus unhappily. For a moment, the atmosphere between them changed, and it became clear to him that he had come at the wrong time. Ventus calmly replied that although he had come at a bad time, he had his own reasons for doing so. He wanted to start to resent it, but quickly shut up, for behind him stood the Crown Prince himself, and Ventus knew from the look in his eyes that he had to get out of here as soon as possible. Besides, he realized that he really had come at the wrong time, and he should have waited for Aisha in the room after all. Although Caligo looked calm and composed, things might be more difficult with the Crown Prince. He liked booze, women, and many other things. The Crown Prince was a dangerous man to be very careful with. Therefore, Ventus decided that he absolutely had to save Aisha from that bastard. He immediately suggested that she talk to him somewhere else. It was obvious from her reaction that she didn't mind going somewhere else as quickly as possible. Without wasting a moment of of time, Ventus used magic to create a dark-colored portal and asked her if she had finished her work. The Grand Duke understood Ventus's intention and played along, telling Asha to show him the way to the store. She immediately agreed. Isha turned around and said, "Goodbye." She then followed right behind Ventus into the magical portal that led into the snowy forest. The Crown Prince was furious. He didn't expect her to be taken right out from under his nose. He shouted loudly and angrily for them to stop, but it was too late. As soon as they entered the magic portal, it closed. The Crown Prince and the Grand Duke were left alone, silently watching the portal disappear. Then Caligo asked the Crown Prince to follow him. As much as he didn't want to, he had to talk to him. This whole situation made him even more angry, but he tried to contain all the anger by clenching his hands into a fist. Despite what had happened, the Crown Prince realized that everything was still ahead of him. If he wanted something, he would get it. They came to Caligo's study, which was done in dark colors. The walls of the study were decorated with gilded ornaments, shields and swords, a painting and more. The furniture was perfectly matched to the interior. Despite all the Grand Duke's reluctance to talk about this woman, the Crown Prince decided to clear the air a bit and asked about Ash. He wanted to know who she was, especially since he knew that Caligo wouldn't be evasive and would tell him about her. The Grand Duke calmly told him that this girl was a mage, but it was all strange, because the Crown Prince knew that his family already had a personal mage, Sir Ventus. He asked the Grand Duke interestedly why he had summoned another mage. Caligo continued to act calm and replied that all mages had different abilities, but the Crown Prince kept asking if he really needed this lady's abilities. The Grand Duke had nothing to hide and replied frankly that he really needed her help. The Crown Prince decided to change the topic of conversation a bit and said that he had been living quietly for the past few years, but thought it was time for him to get busy finding wives for Caligo. He smiled slyly and said that it seemed the Grand Duke had had enough of promiscuous bitches and noble ladies, but Caligo didn't know what he was talking about. The Crown Prince explained that he noticed that the Grand Duke was bored with this type of girl and decided to sleep with a mage. He continued to smile and said that he liked this girl's voice, but he couldn't see her face. It would have been better if she hadn't hidden it. After saying that, Caligo looked at him coldly and turned to him, letting him know that he shouldn't even look at this girl. But the Crown Prince reminded him that they had agreed to share. They'd done that many times before, so why was he acting this way now? Had something changed? The Grand Duke looked at him coldly and continued to restrain himself, not giving the appearance that this girl was important to him. But the Crown Prince could not be fooled. He was a sly one who knew Caligo well and understood his behavior. The Grand Duke explained to him that he had forgotten everything that had gone before. However, the Crown Prince did not believe him. He said that he must remember everything. How could he forget anything? After all, he considers him his close friend. The Crown Prince remembered how Caligo had once changed and decided to let him know that he no longer had anything to do with His Highness. Also, the Grand Duke asked him to visit him less often. He could not believe that his friend had changed so drastically and behaved rudely to him. The Crown Prince looked sadly at Caligo and asked if he was rejecting him again. He pretended to be very sad and said he was in a lot of pain. The Grand Duke apologized to him and told him that he had never considered them close friends. His words seemed to hurt the Crown Prince, but nevertheless, they spoke of something else. He was well aware that Caligo had changed a lot since his rebirth. The Crown Prince wondered what the reason for this change was. The Grand Duke chose not to answer this question and continued to remain calm and silent. Of course, the Crown Prince realized that there was no way he was going to answer that question, but he hoped that, as a friend, he would be frank with him. He stood up and asked again if he really didn't have anything with this girl. The Crown Prince walked up to the Grand Duke, put his hand on his shoulder, and asked if he would mind if he spoke to her. The words made Caligo uncomfortable, but he tried to keep his temper in check. Still, he clutched his chair nervously in anger. The Crown Prince noticed this and thought that the Grand Duke should have tried harder and hidden to the last what he wanted to hide. Caligo's behavior made the Crown Prince more and more curious. Meanwhile, Esha and Ventus were chatting about the Crown Prince and the Grand Duke. She wondered if they were close friends. Ventus, taking a cup of flavored tea, told Ash that they had been close earlier. He also explained that things were different now and they weren't communicating. Esha asked him why this had happened, if something had happened, but Ventus didn't know why that was the case. She tried to remember how it was in the original, and her thoughts were interrupted by Ventus. He asked her if she liked the tea. She said it was just like the tea he had brewed for her in the magic tower. Ventus was glad she was satisfied, but Esha said the tea was still as bitter as before. Her answer made him a little sad and scared him because he didn't know his tea was bitter. Esha smiled and said she was kidding and the tea was great. Ventus gave a sigh of relief and said that she had startled him. After all, He had worked so hard to prepare the most flavorful tea for her and had been so happy to see her. However, at the sight of her smile, his heart calmed down. He asked how she was doing, if everything was all right. She was pleased to hear that he cared about her, but still, she reminded him that she wasn't a child anymore, so he shouldn't worry so much about her. Aisha suddenly began to remember the past. Looking at the cup of this flavored tea, which had a red hue, she remembered that tragic day when everything happened. Everything around was blazing and on fire, which was spreading rapidly, and people here and there lay dead. Always when she remembered that day, tears poured from her eyes, and she was very sad. She blamed herself for the deaths of all those people who had died. After that day, she sealed her own attribute of fire. At this time, it continued to snow, and all the trees and houses around were covered with white snow. There was some man standing outside Asha's house looking to meet her. He tried to open the door, but it was locked. He thought that Aisha couldn't have closed the store without leaving a note. He also figured she had decided to rest today. Verna came up to him and told him that someone had picked up Aisha in the morning, and they had left. He took off his hood and was very surprised, because if she was going anywhere, she should have warned him. He got a little upset and asked Verna who had taken Esha. Verna saw a man with brown hair, green eyes, and a scar on his cheek in front of her and exclaimed happily, "Theros!" She was very happy to see him. Then Verna said that she heard he had become a knight of the Empire. Besides, he had grown up a lot. Theros smiled and said he had grown just a little bit. Verna kept smiling and told him that he had once been told that Ash liked tall guys. Because of that, he drank all the milk he could to get taller. Theros stammered after her words and asked her not to talk about it anymore. He asked her again who had taken Aisha, but she really didn't know, for there were no identifying marks on the carriage. Theros wondered very much how she could have gotten into such a carriage. Verna replied that it was business as usual. She had done it more than once, but Theros reminded her that she had told Ash to be careful more than once. Still, Verna reassured him and told him that she would probably be back by tonight and asked if she could say hello to him. Theros frowned and thought for a moment, then said he shouldn't do that. After all, he was determined to wait for her, no matter how long he had to wait. He looked at the falling snow and said with a smile that he knew how to wait. 7 years ago, while everyone was asleep, an accident happened in one village. The fire engulfed the entire village of Tomaters in the north of the Karhan Empire. People could not stop the flames and fled for their lives. Some called out to Theros, and some asked for help from Kyrian. The woman, holding her baby in her arms, tearfully asked people to help her family who were inside, but no one answered her call, and she just stood there sobbing as she looked at the house that was engulfed in great flames. She sobbed loudly, cradling the baby against her. Unfortunately, it was not easy to put out the fire. On that terrible day, people lost everything, and everyone lost someone: parents, brothers, sisters. And the person who set the village on fire was Esha. Now, remembering the past, she was in unbearable pain. If she could have changed everything, she would have, but alas, it was not in her power. Ventus saw her sad face and asked if she was okay. He reminded her that sealing magic always carries consequences and side effects. Aisha told him he was worrying too much. She was perfectly fine. Ventus was glad to hear that. She asked interestedly about his life and recent activities. He decided not to hide from her and tell her everything. Ventus began by saying that he had been in the magic tower. The new owner was no ordinary person. He also reminded Asha that corruption was rampant in the magic tower. When Ventus learned that the Grand Duke's residence could help him with his research, he decided to move here for a while. Aisha immediately began to feel guilty about his decision to leave the tower, and she asked him if he did it because of her. He smiled and began to reassure her, saying that it was his conscious decision because he was a researcher first and foremost, and then a mage. He was happy with his situation, for he was given food, subsidies, and even high-grade magic stones. He couldn't refuse such a tempting offer. After all, this was literally a paradise for magicians. He smiled contentedly and raised his head proudly. Ventus was a real spender in regards to magical research with experience. Aisha was glad to see him like this. She smiled, thinking about the fact that he certainly hadn't changed. After laughing a bit, Ventus asked her if she could cure Caligo. She told him that she would be able to do it a little later because she didn't have all the ingredients she needed. Aisha told him that the Grand Duke element was pure high-grade fire, but Ventus didn't see what the problem was. He offered to provide her with the contacts of the sellers. Aisha said with a little thought, still it might be a little difficult. After all, only she would be able to find the right ingredients. Ventus wondered what those unusual ingredients were. Esha thought about when she was kicked out of the tower 7 years ago because of some incidents. She remembered the name mentioned in the original, the Forest of Fairies. Only ancient books had mentioned this place, and none of the people of this world remembered it. Moreover, it wasn't easy to get there, but still, It was the only place where she could find pure fire-related ingredients. After all, she was able to earn her reputation as a potion store owner because of it. Esha smiled and promised to tell Ventus about it later. She got up quickly as it was time for her to go home already, even though she was very happy to meet him. Ventus was a little upset that the time had passed so quickly and their conversation was over, but she reassured him and told him that they would meet again. Isha smiled at him goodbye and said, "See you soon, Wen." And then she entered the magical portal that led to her home. And so in the blink of an eye, she found herself not far from her house, which was covered in snow-white snow. She hurried quickly to the store, thinking that the weather was unlikely to bring her any customers. However, she was not upset because she had received a good advance. She hadn't realized the surprise that had brought her to life. Theros sat outside her house covered in snow, head down, trying to keep warm. The cold made his cheeks red, and he was shivering. But when he heard Asha's voice, he quickly raised his head and smiled happily. Theros quickly stood up and ran over to her. He was glad to see her, and happy that he had been able to wait for her. In Asha's imagination, he looked like a cute puppy who had seen his master and was happily running towards him. In spite of all the niceness, she decided, like an older sister, to reprimand him a little, so she asked how long he'd been waiting for her. She touched his red cheeks, which were intensely cold. Esha reminded Theros how more than once she'd asked him to wait for her at the store. She had also told him more than once that the key to the store was under the flower pot. Theros felt a little embarrassed that he had made her worry. He wanted to explain everything, but Esha didn't let him do that. Instead, she asked him how many times she had told him that. He felt even more guilty and answered, 3 times. His answer infuriated Isha. It wasn't clear to her why he remembered how many times she had told him that, but continued to sit in the cold instead of in the store waiting for her. She was angry because she was worried about his health, but his smile in this situation surprised her. Theros was happy to see her so concerned about him, even though she was yelling at him. Isha angrily asked him how he could smile when he could freeze to death. Ventus took her hands in his and said calmly, "Sister, I have to go now." She immediately fell silent because she hadn't expected that he needed to leave so quickly. He looked at her tenderly and wondered if she would continue to be angry with him. But Esha was not confused and immediately gave him a slap on the forehead. Theros hadn't expected such a welcome gift from her. Isha said he's cocky. Is he really trying to piss off his sister? But Theros didn't even think about it. He'd waited so long for her, and she'd yelled at him and slapped him. It was ridiculous. Isha opened the door to the store and told him to come inside, for it was cold outside. Besides, she offered him dinner together, but unfortunately, he had to leave. Theros held the door open and told Ash that he had a gift for her. Aisha couldn't make him stay, so she stopped urging him. She turned back to him. He smiled and told her that he had only come to give her a gift, which was why he had waited so long for her. He took her hand and placed a bottle with a blue liquid inside on it. She asked him in surprise what it was. She considered the bottle and realized that it didn't look like a normal potion. Theros explained to her that it was water from the oracle's spring. She repeated his words thoughtfully, and then when she realized what it was all about, she was just shocked. He said that she was somehow interested in it, so he brought her a bottle of this water. She had completely forgotten that she had ever talked about this water. Aisha remembered once asking Theros about the water from the oracle's spring, where the ingredients were mixed. She had heard that it was different from holy water. Then he asked her if she wanted him to bring her the water, but Aisha explained that ordinary people could not get it, for not everyone was allowed in that place. Even then, she asked him if he was really going to bring her that water, but Theros only smiled sweetly and replied that he couldn't do that because ordinary people couldn't get that water. She sighed then. Even though she wanted to get it, she had no way of doing so. Meanwhile, Theros continued to watch her and make a mental plan to get that water for Isha. To her, they were just jokes. She had no way of knowing that he would really get water and surprise her like that. She looked at him seriously and admitted that it would be wonderful if he kept doing it. But then she quietly asked him if he had stolen it from the temple. Theros answered embarrassedly that he had not. He explained that he could move to the holy cathedral, and she would have an unlimited supply of that water. She couldn't believe Theros had left the Knights just for that. She worried about how he would be able to get back out there. For Asha, the news was shocking because he had worked so hard for so long to be recognized and just walked away from it like that. But Theros asked her to let him do something for her for once. After all, she had worked so hard for him too. He continued to hold her hand, saying that he wanted to repay her for all her care and support. But instantly, Esha's face changed and became very serious. She explained to him that it was only her personal decision. Besides, it wasn't about him, and she didn't expect him to thank her or pay her. She got angry, quickly handed him the water bottle and told him he should leave. Aisha was very angry that he had sacrificed so much for her, even though she hadn't asked or demanded it of him. And Theros was very sad that she didn't understand or appreciate his intentions and actions. He approached Asha and asked to take her water, since he had completed the procedure and would have to go to the temple in a few days. He also reassured her by telling her that he had transferred because it was better there. Again, he asked her to take a water bottle. After all, he'd spent so much time, not for such a good thing to go to waste. Asha felt uncomfortable with her moralizing. Theros needed to leave already, so he suggested she continue their conversation another time. He smiled and waved goodbye, promising her he'd be back. Aisha stood still and looked after him and felt sad as she remembered that 7 years ago, the village of Tometers had been burned down. Unfortunately, the one who did this terrible crime was her, Asha Bliss. No matter how much she blamed herself or what she did, she couldn't change anything. That day, in that place, Theros lost his parents and his brother. She blamed herself for it and tried to make amends with her care and help. Aisha was in her house and sitting at the table looking at the water bottle Theros had left for her. She realized she needed to be more careful. It had been a while and he had changed so much because of her. Aisha felt guilty about it. She started talking to herself out of habit. Aisha noticed that Theros' life path had changed again. Of course, she remembered that he wasn't the main character. Even though she had once wanted to influence the original story in some way, it was different now. Aisha decided she didn't want to see other people's lives changed because of her anymore. She'd had enough of it. She hurriedly started her work because she needed to fulfill the order as quickly as possible. She also needed to settle the matter with that man. Suddenly, Aisha stopped because she remembered something important to her. She pulled out her magic stone on a chain and looked at it angrily, clutching it tightly in her hand. Aisha started talking to him. She first asked him why he was silent, whether he preferred to sleep or just didn't want to talk to her, but there was silence in response. She looked at him even more intently and asked him menacingly if he wanted to hide something from her. Suddenly, the magic stone spoke. He told her that she was wrong, for he was not hiding anything from her. Then she asked him why he had behaved that way. He asked what was wrong with his behavior and what she meant by it. Aisha told him that a man had touched him and he hadn't reacted in any way. She reminded him that he hated to be touched without her permission, and that surprised her. She told him that it had happened before. She had to work hard because of him running away. Magical Stone remembered that he had been very scared then. Because Aisha had vomited, most of her limbs were dislocated or broken, and her skin had shriveled and torn in some places. Aisha continued to stare at him, waiting for an answer as to why he acted that way in that situation. She asked him again why, after all, he didn't react to the man, but just continued to remain silent. Aisha couldn't believe he was scared. After all, he was a magical stone that could tell a person apart before running away. He couldn't lie, and so he answered honestly that he wasn't scared. Aisha continued to question him about what was the reason for his strange behavior then. It all suggested to her that he was hiding something from her. She urged him to tell her the truth at once. At this time, fluffy snow was falling outside, covering the huge castle where the Grand Duke lived. Caligo stood at the window and looked thoughtfully at the happenings outside. There were too many thoughts in his head. He reflected on what had happened to him over these past few days. The meeting with Asha, and then with the Crown Prince. The many unresolved matters, all of it troubled him. Suddenly, someone called out to him, and he turned around unhappily, for it was a voice he knew well. Of course it was Sir Ventus, who quickly rushed over to him because he was very unhappy that he had decided to ask Aisha to cure him. He grudgingly asked the Grand Duke what the big deal was with Ash and why exactly she should be in charge of making a cure for him. Caligo looked at him calmly and replied that he needed a mage who could brew the potion without any side effects. But his words did nothing to appease Ventus, and he became even more angry and began to yell at him for not telling him that it would be Aisha, his apprentice. In fact, Caligo didn't know that either. Ventus said he should have found out more before bringing her here, or at least finding out about the mage's gender. However, it was incomprehensible to the Grand Duke what was wrong with the fact that a mage could be a woman. His answer infuriated Ventus even more. Not only was he shocked, but he didn't realize if Caligo didn't remember his sexual problem, so he decided to remind him that he had been giving him the potion on a regular basis for the past 5 years because of his sex drive. It was strange to Ventus that a man who had long been drinking potions to tame his desire and avoiding women suddenly started looking for a mage, and a female one at that. Ventus angrily asked the Grand Duke if he had fallen in love with her at first sight and wanted to live like a criminal again. He looked at him with an angry and stern look, wanting a frank answer. But to Caligo, it was a strange question, since he had no other intentions other than to get the potion without side effects. So he calmly replied that he was unaware that Ventus was still deluded about this, and they would have such a misunderstanding. The Grand Duke angrily asked him if this was how he still saw him. Ventus became very uncomfortable. He was silent for a moment, and then replied that he didn't mean it. He lowered his head, thinking that he had indeed overreacted a little. Caligo explained that it was just outrageous, but he understood why there was such a misunderstanding between them. He frankly told Ventus that he didn't need a female mage specifically, just someone who could create the necessary potion without side effects. The Grand Duke took out a bottle of medicine and quickly drank it. Finally, Ventus realized that he had really made a mistake. Putting the bottle back, Caligo suggested he find another, but he didn't understand what it was about. The Grand Duke explained that he could find another person for him who could brew the potion without side effects. That is, Ventus could find another mage and bring him to Caligo, because that was the only reason he was looking for Isha. Meanwhile, the magic stone told Ash that something was wrong with Caligo. She was very surprised. The magic stone told her that it seemed to him that the Grand Duke had not only human blood, but also dragon blood. That was how Isha learned that Caligo was a descendant of the dragon race. The magic stone felt a faint response, so it assumed that this blood was several generations old. She wondered if there was something like that in the original, about dragons and hybrids, and where it all came from. Esha hadn't seen any mention of the secret of the genus Ethos. Still, she decided she probably didn't remember it, but that information wasn't important. Isha knew that dragons are one-loving and devote all of themselves only to a companion or life partner, and the Grand Duke is not such a person because he was too lustful to belong to the dragon race. But the magical stone explained that it could be the effects of incest between dragon and human. This news not only surprised, but also upset Isha. Pebbles noticed this and asked why she was so upset, but she decided to pretend that nothing had happened. The Pebble had noticed the change in her mood very well. He also saw that her gaze had been running since the beginning of their conversation, and she was also trying to hide her real voice. In addition, her heartbeat increased, but Esha started to say it was the heartbeat of a pebble and closed it in her palms, willing it to be silent. Suddenly, she heard someone coming and calling for her. She told the pebble she wasn't upset and continued to squeeze it hard in her hand. And then she angrily explained that she had nothing to do with him. Then Esha quickly put on her hood to hide her face and hurriedly opened the door. As expected, the Grand Duke came to see her. Why he had come, Esha didn't know. The potion wasn't ready yet. Of course, she remembered that they had a lot in common. It was Caligo's first time in her store, and after looking around a bit, he noticed that it was much more spacious than he had expected. He was surprised that even in the store, Esha hadn't taken off her cloak. However, she reminded him that she had a terrible scar on her face, and he'd rather not see it. She then asked the Grand Duke what had brought him to her. He said that he was returning from the Emperor's castle, and decided to stop by her place on his way home. He thought it was a good opportunity to ask how the potion was coming along. Isha replied that she had told him earlier about how long it would take. Nevertheless, she'll stick to the contractual framework. As soon as she has the right ingredients, she'll get right to work. Caligo asked if she planned to buy the ingredients herself. Isha told him that she was going to go shopping for them soon. He was pleased that she hadn't forgotten her promise and didn't ask her any more questions. He looked a little sad, though he could tell by the way he looked at her. His behavior and questions confused her a little, and she didn't understand why he had come to her. They had already discussed all the details before. Near the door, he turned around and said he understood her and said goodbye, then left. She was in shock for a while because she didn't realize what it was. She was also uneasy about the Grand Duke's intense interest in her. Even so, she hoped he wouldn't come to her again and bother her with constant questioning when his potion would be ready. But Esha was very much mistaken because he did start coming to her store every day. When he came the next day, she still hoped it was the last time. However, he kept coming the next day, and the day after that. Every day, Caligo came to her and bored her with his presence without even realizing it. One day, she couldn't stand it and let her emotions get the best of her. Esha shouted loudly for him to stop coming to her. She was very angry. This time, she decided not to hold back, but to ask him directly why he kept coming to her, knowing that it was interfering with her work. However, her words did not upset him, but surprised him. The Grand Duke asked if there was any reason why he should not come to her. His answer made her even more angry. Esha made it clear to him that there were indeed reasons. Because of his constant presence, she couldn't start working, and she had a very large pile of orders to fulfill. She frankly explained to him that she understood the urgency of his order, but she would contact him as soon as she had prepared the potion. That was why he should go home. This time, however, the Grand Duke came to order another potion from her. Despite this, Esha coldly replied that she had a lot of things to do, so she was refusing the order. But when she saw the prepayment, a sack full of gold coins, her opinion changed dramatically. She decided she couldn't pass up such an order because she needed the money. So Esha quickly took the money pouch and hid it in her chest. Then she, as if nothing had happened, came back and smiled contentedly and greeted the welcome guest cheerfully. Asha asked what he wished for. Caligo realized that money played a very big role in her life. She suggested he not be shy and tell her what he wanted, whatever it was. It was simple. He needed a potion for his knights. When they went scouting in the northern forest, one of them was poisoned by a monster. Aisha had heard that there were almost no monsters that could use poison left. Therefore, she was very surprised that such a thing happened. Caligo explained to her that there were several such beasts in the northern forest in Ethos's territory. The northern forest was near the mountains, where it was not only cold and constantly snowing, but also too dangerous, because it was a place teeming with the most dangerous creatures of the Karhan Empire. The emperor gave most of the state to Grand Duke Ethos to deal with these monsters, but the emperor was very cunning, and the true reason for his actions was something else entirely. He was unwilling to allow the Grand Duke of Ethos and his descendants to claim the throne. In addition, the emperor used the war to isolate and control his family. Therefore, fulfilling the will of the emperor, the knights of the Grand Duke of Ethos spend most of their time fighting the monsters here. Thus, the emperor's power was spreading everywhere. Then, Esha realized that he needed a powerful antidote, and she was right. Caligo was looking for an antidote to the poison of the Teldriksha, one of the local monsters. Esha remembered that only in the local area could this poison be found, which penetrates the body from the slightest touch to the skin. But in order to extract the poison, the monster must still be alive. She asked the Grand Duke if he had found the poison. He had indeed succeeded and had brought that poison. Caligo explained that he had learned that she would need the ingredients of the poison to make an antidote. He told her about the other doctor's unsuccessful attempts to make an antidote and that he had almost given up. If she succeeded, it would help reduce the number of dead and amputated knights. Aisha thought about it for a while and decided that she would take the order, but she explained to him that it would be quite difficult, so he would have to pay her 3 times what was in the bag. Well, when the potion's effectiveness was proven, he would need to pay her another 20-fold. Aisha gave him a piece of paper with a contract written on it. Caligo looked at it, then agreed to her terms. She was very surprised that he agreed with her, and without even reading the contract, signed it right away. He hadn't been that kind of person before. It became clear to her that money was not a problem for him, and she was right. The Grand Duke had explained to her that he didn't care about money when it came to the health of his people. The time was late when he left Ashi's store and was returning home in his carriage. Meanwhile, Esha was looking out the window and thinking about all the events that had happened to her lately. Everything was very strange to her. She remembered that in the original, the main character had no reason to visit the capital. Esha wondered why he had started coming here so often. Although his behavior had changed, there were many other things she didn't understand. Suddenly, she thought that maybe something had changed again. Esha decided not to waste any time and went about her business in the store. As she did, she also remembered that it was time for her to pack her things for the hike. After a while, she was done with everything, and Pebbles said she still had a lot of work to do this year. Her backpack seemed to be getting heavier with each hike. But Esha didn't worry because she had magic. She hadn't forgotten that it was winter all year round in the Forest of Fairies. So she decided to prepare well, so she wouldn't freeze to death. Pebbles had told her that fire magic was very useful at times like this. But Esha didn't get his hints, so she asked him again what he meant. And a pebble named Luke asked why she didn't want to take someone with her who could handle the cold well. Then Asha asked who he was talking about. He reminded her of a half-blood dragon with pure fire magic. It was the man who came to their store every day. The Grand Duke immediately appeared in her thoughts, looking at her with his scarlet eyes. Asha asked Luke to stop setting her up with him because she was getting really tired of the rumors that they were having an intimate relationship. She thought everything would be fine if she didn't pay attention to it, but people saw how often Caligo came to see her and began to think there was something between them. Verna came to her one day and told her that everyone was talking about some aristocrat visiting her every day in his carriage. She asked if he was handsome. To her, the story only gave Ash a headache. She said it was a mere customer, but Verna didn't believe her because he was coming himself, not sending someone to her, so she thought there was something wrong, and she felt there was something between them. Verna asked Asha, "What's he like?" But she couldn't answer honestly because the man was her ex-husband. In their previous life, they were married only on paper, never even holding hands, and their entire marriage was an embodiment of the word ice. And she was eventually executed without explanation, all because she was the wife of a traitor. Then she sobbed a lot, and no one came to help her. Suddenly, she had a seizure and was in a lot of pain. Luke realized something was wrong. He started to ask her if she was all right. She didn't answer because her whole body was in great pain. No matter how much Luke tried to talk to her, she didn't respond because she was in insane pain at that point. She fell to the floor. Luke kept calling out to her. He asked her not to lose her consciousness. Esha knew perfectly well that she shouldn't faint because she needed to go to the Forest of Fae and resolve the issue with that man as soon as possible. After a while, she intermittently heard someone calling her name Rena and asking her to open her eyes, but she couldn't see who it was. It was actually Caligo. A few minutes before, Verna had knocked on her door, but the door was closed for some reason, and she was very surprised. She started to call for her, for she remembered well that Esha should have been home at this time, but for some reason the door was closed. Suddenly she felt someone walk up and stand at her back. It was the Grand Duke. He also came to Asha's house. He asked Verna, "She doesn't open." She turned around in surprise and saw a handsome man behind her. Verna replied that he was right. Caligo asked why she didn't open, but alas, she didn't know either. Suddenly, she realized that this could be the man from the rumors who kept coming to see Asha at the store. The Grand Duke went to the door and began to reason how he might open it. He realized that he didn't have the key, and Asha was inside, so he needed to do something to open this door. The only thing he could think of was to use his strength and break down the door. Verna, when she saw this, was shocked and thought he had lost his mind and immediately quickly yelled out that she had the key. Luckily, she managed to stop him quickly. Verna explained to him that Esha would be very angry if he broke down the door. Besides, she hadn't expected him to act so decisively. Still, Verna couldn't understand how he could be so strong and yet not think of the consequences of his actions. She quickly pulled out her key and opened the door. Finally, she would be able to talk to Asha. Entering her store, she called out to Esha, but heard no response. It was strange. It was also very cold in the store, so she became even more worried, and Caligo realized that something was wrong. Suddenly he saw Esha, who was lying motionless on the floor. He realized she wasn't feeling well. Caligo quickly ran to her aid. As he got closer, he saw that she was unconscious. He needed to help her as soon as possible. Seeing her in such a state, the Grand Duke was very frightened. He walked over and took her in his arms. He was relieved because she was alive. She continued to be unconscious, and he didn't know how he could help her. Verna watched his actions, not realizing what he was doing. He continued to hold her in his arms and asked her to wake up, calling her Rena. The Grand Duke remembered the day 7 years ago when he woke up and found himself in this world and in this body. The knight was running somewhere and shouting joyfully that the Grand Duke was alive and he was awake. He was visited by his butler, who called him Your Lordship, the Grand Duke of Ethos. It was hard for him to believe that something so incredible had happened. He couldn't understand how it had happened, why he was not in his body. His butler watched him and saw that his behavior had changed. The Grand Duke couldn't help but wonder why he was in another world. He was also very worried about his wife Rena. His look became very fierce when he did not get an answer concerning his wife, whether she was all right. He quickly drew his sword and struck. Butler miraculously managed to dodge his blow. The knights quickly ran into his room where he stood and menacingly asked if his wife was all right. No one could understand what was happening to him. He behaved differently than he did now, and he didn't have a wife. No one here knew Rena. That day, he ran away from the castle and rushed off into the distance with his sword in his hand and only had time to put on his shirt without even buttoning it. Caligo worried a lot about his wife and called for her all the time. All his thoughts were only about her. He ran and looked for her everywhere. At this time, as he was running somewhere through the trees, a woman with red hair was watching him in the bushes. Oddly enough, she had in her hand the same piece of jewelry with the magic stone he had given Rena before he died. Caligo was exhausted and also very agitated because he didn't know where he was, or where Rena was, or what was even going on. Meanwhile, the woman watching him quickly began to run away from him. His eyes emitted some kind of red light. He quickly spotted the woman and began to pursue her. Suddenly, Caligo saw in her hand the very jewelry with the magic stone he had given Rena. No matter how hard the stranger tried, she couldn't hide from him and run away. The Grand Duke quickly caught up with her, and she was already standing on the edge of the cliff. He asked him where she had gotten the necklace. He became even more angry, and red magical flames began to emanate from him. He asked loudly and angrily, "Is Rena around here somewhere?" Caligo kept approaching the woman, asking what she had done to Rena, but the woman was scared out of her mind and didn't know any Rena. She quickly tossed that necklace away and jumped off the cliff herself. Unfortunately, at that moment, he lost the last hope that had nurtured him for so long. And since then, Caligo Ethos has changed. He remembered waking up in bed and having doctors running around him yelling to get Cervantes immediately because the Grand Duke wasn't feeling well. He was really, really sick. All he had was an idiotic dying body, and there was nothing he could do about it. The doctors continued to stay by his side at all times and somehow help him with his treatment. One day, Ventus, seeing how bad he was feeling, suggested that he stop drinking the potion since he was suffering so much from the side effects of the medicine. But the Grand Duke continued to drink the medicine despite the unbearable pain. Still, Ventus thought it would be better to stop taking the medication and not suffer the side effects. He also advised Caligo to summon the girl to his chambers and live freely as before, but the Grand Duke didn't see a bit of freedom in that. He became very angry because he had no control over his body. It was definitely not freedom. Despite not feeling well, he decided that he needed to keep looking for a mage who could brew him a potion without side effects. And after all this time, he finally found that person. It was Asha Bliss. When he saw her taking off the jewelry with the magic stone, he immediately guessed it was her. Furthermore, when she handed him the magic stone saying that it contained all 4 attributes, he was completely sure that it was her. He also remembered remembered how she had named his precious child, but to his mind, that person could only be her. Caligo continued to hold her in his arms and then kissed her. He thought about the fact that she remembered him. That's why she always wore a cape, because she didn't want him to recognize her. Aisha muttered that she was very cold, and the Grand Duke answered her that he was nearby and began to warm her body with his fire magic. After a while, he saw that she felt better and warmed up and her complexion improved. He took her in his arms to put her on the bed while asking Verna to get a doctor. Verna immediately went quickly to look for the doctor, but he asked her to linger. Caligo turned to her and asked that she not tell anyone that he had come by. It hadn't been long since Caligo had left. Verna was left to take care of Ash. She thought about everything she had seen today. It became clear to her that the man had come here for a reason. Verna got the impression as if Esha and him knew each other very well. Also, it's like they had a very close relationship a long time ago, like lovers. It was all strange. Since this person had not been there before and had only recently appeared, somehow their relationship had developed very quickly. Suddenly, she noticed that Esha had woken up and was already trying to get out of bed. She was very surprised to see Sis Verna beside her. Verna immediately told him that she was very worried about her. She looked at the thermometer and saw that she had no fever and the fever was finally gone. Then she told Asha that she felt so bad that she even fainted. Verna asked her why Asha had not called for help, but Esha smilingly replied that she does this every year. She prepares the medicine in advance, but this time she forgot about it. Aisha asked her how she knew to come. Verna said that the store had been closed for 3 days, so she knew something had happened. That meant she had been unconscious for 3 days. Esha asked. It was Theros who carried her to the bed. Verna smiled and asked why she thought that. She remembered the handsome brunette with the scarlet eyes. She explained to her that she was very vague, but heard a man's voice when she lost consciousness. Unfortunately, Verna couldn't tell her everything as it happened. She had promised the man that she would not tell anyone about his visit, so she just said the doctor helped her move her to the bed. Immediately, she noticed that Asha's mood had changed. It was as if she was a little upset. Verna asked her if she had said something wrong, but Esha continued to smile and explained that that wasn't the point. She thought of clearly hearing a voice calling out. It said, "Rena." That voice was calling her, asking her to open her eyes. It wasn't calling her by the name of this world. Someone was calling her using her real name. Esha was very surprised because she hadn't heard that name in a long time. After a while, she looked out the window and admired the beautiful sunset. Suddenly, her magic stone named Luke, which was lying on the windowsill, spoke to her. It called out to her. She looked at him and was surprised that he had been silent all this time, but only now began to say something. He kept persistently calling out to her and asking if she was okay. Aisha was very happy to hear him, and Luke finally heard her voice, so he breathed a sigh of relief. She asked Luke not to worry because she felt fine. Luke told her that he had been feeling some kind of weakness ever since, which was why he was worried about her, and Aisha kept wondering who was calling her. She asked Luke if it was possible that someone else was here. It seemed to her that there was still someone else in the room besides Verna and the doctor when she fainted. Luke wondered for a moment who could have come, and immediately Caligo's face appeared with his scarlet eyes looking at her so intently. Suddenly, Esha heard a knock on the door. She wondered who it could be, because she wasn't expecting guests or customers. It was Theros. He had heard that she was sick, so he came to check on her and do something to help her. He looked out the window and saw that Esha was home, and she recognized that Theros had come to see her. So she quickly hurried to open the door so he wouldn't freeze outside like last time. Theros was very excited, and it was evident from him that he was in a great hurry to see her. He was very worried about her because he had heard that she had gotten sick. She wondered how he knew that, since few people knew about the fact that she wasn't feeling well. He explained to her that when he arrived, he met Miss Verna, and she told him everything. Esha sighed heavily and thought about Verna's inability to keep her mouth shut. Theros continued to stare at her restlessly, trying to figure out if she was really okay. She smiled and looked at him in surprise, not understanding what was going on in his head, and Theros thought about how the man had recognized that name. After all, he'd heard it himself 7 years ago when he'd secretly watched Asha. He'd watched her learn magic from her teacher more than once. That day, she was with Serventus, and they were having a magic lesson. He asked her in surprise what the spell was that she had written on a piece of paper and placed in the center of the magic circle. He read it, and it said, Rena Corneli. She told him that was another name for her. Serventus learned that she had another name. Esha explained to him that it was needed for the spell, so she asked him to memorize the name. Theros continued to watch them and was very happy to learn her middle name. It was as if he had learned her secret, which he decided to keep private. Meanwhile, Esha successfully applied her spell, and the magic circle began to glow blow, and the leaves began to swirl in the air. Today, when he met Sister Verna, she told him that Isha had fainted again. She gave him some medicine and asked him to give them to Isha. Also, for some reason, she asked him if he had ever heard the name Rena. It was the second time he'd heard that name. He was very surprised when Verna asked him about it and said he had not heard the name before. She smiled and said it was the first time she'd heard that name too, which was why she'd inquired about it. In addition, Verna said that it was strange for her to hear someone call Isha Rena. She didn't understand why he called her that. He pondered everything he'd heard from Sister Verna for a while and didn't hear Esha call out to him. He finally looked at her and asked if his room was still there next to the warehouse. Esha wanted to say that everything was fine and he didn't need to worry about her. Theros explained to her that even though he had to go, he was very worried about her. He decided to stay because he wouldn't be able to focus on training or anything else. He smiled at her and told her that he remembered that she couldn't sleep if someone was around, so he would sit quietly in his room. Besides, he wanted to take a little nap, so he quickly went to his room. Although he didn't show it, he felt sad that the other man was near her. He, of all people, knew everything about Asha. He'd gotten to know her well over time. Since he wasn't a little kid anymore, Theros understood what Ashi's feelings were for him, and these feelings, they were different from his feelings for her. It was not only compassion, but responsibility. Even so, he hadn't given up hope that her feelings for him might eventually change and she might see him as a man. However, all he had to do was to be there and wait for it to happen. The next day came. The sun was shining brightly, peeking out from behind the clouds. The sun's rays began to break through the window, trying to wake up the potion store owner, telling her that it was already time to wake up. Aisha mumbled something reluctantly, not wanting to interrupt her sweet sleep and leave her warm bed. She didn't want to get up and go to work. She looked up at the window, covering her face from the sunlight with her hand, and thought about how long it had been since she'd fallen asleep. She managed to get a very good night's sleep this time and felt much better. Luke woke up too and asked her what was wrong. She was very surprised because she felt very different. Esha thought there was something wrong with her body. Normally, she felt like she had been sick for a week, but now she was fine. So she thought that her gymnastics were working, and it was a sign that she was on the mend. That made her very happy. Isha remembered that today was delivery day for the Grand Duke Knights, and she almost missed delivery day. She grabbed her cloak and started to put it on because Caligo had to come in person to get the medicine. She didn't want him to recognize her. Asha remarked that Luke cares about the Knights because he always cares about them every time he sees them. Luke said that he thought the Grand Duke wasn't just coming to her store for an order. Obviously, he had other motives. But Esha was also unaware of his true intentions and motives for coming. But Luke has noticed that she acts like this all the time when he comes over, yet she lies and walks around in that cloak, hiding her face from him. Finally, Esha realized that Luke wanted to talk to her about it, but he knew even if he asked her all the questions he wanted to ask her, she probably wouldn't want to answer them. And he was right, so she advised him not to even try to ask her those questions. She understood that he was very curious to know everything, but Esha wasn't ready to tell him all her secrets just yet. Still, she blatantly told Luke that this man knew her by sight, which is why she wore the cloak. Also, Isha said she knows him very well too. Luke asked then, "You don't want to mess with him anymore?" She thought for a moment and didn't know how to answer that question properly. But still, she replied that she thought it was the way it should be. When she got downstairs, she saw that everything was fine in the store, and Theros was quickly carrying a box of medicine somewhere. Esha called out to him, and he quickly turned around. Theros smiled and was very glad that Esha was awake. He asked her if she had slept well and how she was feeling. He also went over to her, put his hand on her forehead, and checked to see if she had a fever. Thankfully, the fever had gone down, and she was already looking better. Theros asked if she was doing well. She smiled and said she felt great and full of energy. Still, Theros asked her not to overwork herself, but to rest because she should have spent more time on her health. Since she was asleep, he opened the store himself and wrote down all the customer orders. He also prepared a potion for the Grand Duke's Knights and arranged for this potion to be delivered to the castle. Theros smiled happily and asked her if he had done well with everything. He expected her to finally praise him and tell him that he was good and better than everyone else. Aisha smiled and said that he did a good job. She also thanked him for his help because he had helped her a lot. She also praised him, saying he did well and did a great job. Theros then asked her if she was going somewhere. He saw that her suitcases were all packed. She told him that she was going to go tomorrow to get the ingredients needed to create one medicine. When Theros heard about it, he was immediately angry. He reminded her that she wasn't in the best condition for such a trip. Esha really didn't think it would be this bad. However, she felt normal already. Still, he disagreed with her and insisted that the order would wait because she had just gotten over her illness and needed time to recover. Aisha told him that she couldn't put it off any longer. Since she had to deal with this as soon as possible, she needed the ingredients of the fire element. He was very surprised that someone needed the elements of fire. His surprise was justified because fire was the strongest element, so few people possessed it. Besides, it was very difficult for a human to withstand such power. That was why she decided she should hurry before he was hurt even more. Theros suggested she go together. He explained that it would be very hard for her alone, but Aisha reminded him that she wasn't taking anyone with her, and he knew that very well. But still, he insisted on doing his own thing because he was greatly concerned about her. Suddenly, the Grand Duke came to them, and she quickly stood up, put a hood over her head to hide her face, and asked Theros to wait for a while. She greeted Caligo politely at Aisha's potion store. Aisha saw that he was acting strange and not answering her. He was also holding his heart with his hand, breathing heavily and barely moving his legs. She asked if he was in pain, for he did not look well. She asked him if he was in pain, for he didn't look very well, but he couldn't answer her, only clenched his teeth nervously and held on to his heart. He then fell to the floor, continuing to feel unbearable pain. Aisha continued to stand still, not knowing what to do or how to act in this situation, but she thought about how to help him. Caligo looked at her with hope in his eyes that she would finally help him. The Grand Duke could only say, Theros looked at him suspiciously. Aisha quickly ran up to him and began to examine him. She really wanted to help him. She noticed immediately that he was burning, but not even a drop of sweat came out. She finally realized what was happening to him. It was the aura of the storm. He held his hand over his heart, from which red-colored energy began to emanate around him. She'd never heard of such symptoms before. She quickly took his hand that was clutching his heart and placed her own hand in its place. In this way, she managed to calm the energy raging inside. She wanted Caligo to tell her what had happened. Thanks to Theros, she was able to carry the Grand Duke to her room and then asked him to go back to his room. She asked him to forgive her for that. He was still sad that she had done that to him and had forgotten how much he cared for her. She went over to the Grand Duke, who was lying on her bed, and asked how he was feeling. But he did not answer her, but continued to squeeze his heart hard. Aisha asked him to stop because he was hurting himself even more. Suddenly, he grabbed her arm and pulled her quickly to him, and so she found herself on top of him. He looked at her passionately and wanted desperately to quench his thirst. She realized now that he had a strong sexual desire that he couldn't suppress. Despite his best efforts, he couldn't contain himself. He quickly placed her on the bed and tried to quench his desire. Theros, meanwhile, remembered Aisha telling him to go back to his place. He was very upset. He asked her if she really wanted him to leave her alone with that man, but she explained that he had gotten it all wrong. She just couldn't leave a client in distress. But no matter how angry or disagreeable he was, he couldn't change her mind. Besides, there had never been any customers in her room before. Still, he tried to change her mind, talking about wanting to help her, but Aisha reminded him that she handles all work matters herself. She asked him to understand her and forgive her, then closed the door. She also told him to be careful. That's how Theros was left standing by himself in front of the closed door of her room. He felt resentment and anger, then quickly ran away from her house. After running like that for a while, he stopped to rest. He remembered Sister Verna's question about whether he had ever heard the name Ren. Theros couldn't forget the way she puzzled over why that man had called Aisha Rena. Theros finally realized that the man Verna was talking about was the man Aisha had been alone with in her room. Of course he had feelings for Ash. He kept worrying about her and hoping that nothing would happen and everything would be okay with her. Meanwhile, the Grand Duke had completely lost control of his body and was lying on top of Ash. He started kissing her neck. Aisha was getting very nervous and quickly started thinking what she should do. She asked him to stop, but his desire was so strong that Caligo didn't respond to her pleas. No matter how hard she tried to stop him, it was all in vain. Aisha realized that this shouldn't happen, so she needed to stop him somehow after all. He squeezed her hand to keep her from pulling out of his embrace, but Aisha told him that she knew he wasn't that kind of man. She reminded him that he was not a weakling who could give in to his desire so easily. Aisha then touched his cheek and gently looked into his eyes and asked him to come to his senses. Suddenly he loosened his grip and tried with all his might to rein himself in. Aisha decided to take advantage of this and quickly threw Caligo off of her. She then began to suppress his fire energy with her magical power. Blue flames began to emerge from her and the magic stone in different directions. And these flames, like chains, bound the hands and feet of the Grand Duke so that he could not move. Aisha needed to get his shirt off, but because of the large number of buttons, she couldn't do it quickly. She decided to act quickly, so she simply opened her shirt abruptly so that the buttons flew off in different directions. When she saw his naked body covered in scars, she was simply shocked. Looking at those scars, Aisha realized how much he had suffered. The scars were not only on his arms and chest, but all over his body. She didn't understand how this could have happened to him. She saw a sun on his chest with a month inside it. Aisha realized it was dark magic. She had seen such a seal long ago, when she was still Rena Corneli and Caligo Edmund was her husband. One day, he showed her this seal and told her that he had been attacked by a mage during a battle. Everyone said he should have died because of that seal, but for some unknown reason, he managed to survive. Except the scars weren't gone. Esha couldn't understand why the seal and scars were on this body too. She looked at Caligo, who was in a lot of pain, but he continued to endure the pain. She wondered who he really was. He finally calmed down a bit, and Esha reminded herself to stay calm. She then decided that it was necessary to attend to his healing first. Her hands began to emit a magical flame with which she used to treat him. Either from the treatment or the pain, Caligo mumbled something. Suddenly, he opened his eyes and saw Isha. She said he should get some sleep. Then she put her hand to his head and wished him good dreams, and he fell fast asleep. She completed his treatment and left him alone in the room. Walking into the other room, Esha grabbed her head with her hand and thought about what she had done. She looked at herself in the mirror and felt sad. She looked at herself in the mirror and was disappointed. She also saw that Caligo's kiss had left a mark on her neck. The first thing that came to her mind was, what a bastard! And now she had another problem, how she could hide that kiss mark. She was very angry with him, and also her face was red with embarrassment. She didn't want anyone to see it. Aisha thought she should change her clothes. If she put on a cloak, she could hide everything. Suddenly she stopped and realized something was wrong. She looked in the mirror and finally realized what was wrong. She noticed she wasn't wearing a cloak. When she got to her room, she wasn't wearing her cloak. And when the Grand Duke woke up and called out to her, he saw her face. Even when she was healing, she was without her cloak the whole time. Naturally, Caligo could see her face. She realized that she had been careless, and she berated herself for it.